thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Join us as we dive into the deep end of the unexplainable and try to piece together what happened. You are listening to Locations Unknown. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Locations Unknown. I am Joe Irado, and with me, as always, is the guy who's more fun than a ball pit big enough for adults, Mike Vandebogart.
Thanks for the intro, Joe. This isn't one of our normal episodes. We've been teasing this for several weeks now, but we finally got the Arvin Nelson interview with his two close friends, Jay and Jason. So it's about 40 minutes long, and it really gives us some exciting details about Arvin that we didn't know from the information that's available online. And Jay and Jason had a lot of great insights on the location, where he went missing, what they think happened to him, and just some overall, details on what Arvin was like as a person before he went missing. So
I'm glad we got this interview set up, because I know and I'll say right now, if you haven't listened to the Arvin Nelson episode, I would say go back, listen to it. It's episode 5, so it's obviously a while ago. It took a little bit to get this interview together, but Mike, you get all the credit on coordinating and actually doing the interview. I was not present for it. But go listen to the Arvin Nelson episode and then tune in to the interview, because you're going to hear from two very, very close friends of Arvin's. Was it one of them was in college with him, roommates?
One of them, yeah, one of the guys met Arvin in college and knew him for decades, and the other guy knew Arvin, during his time living in California, and they both hiked with him a lot. So they've been hiking with him. They've been in this area with him before he went missing. Neither of them were hiking with him on the hike that he went missing, but they had a lot of great insight into Arvin in the case. So yeah, it was a great interview. It was a little hard to coordinate. One of the guys lives in New York and the other guy lives on the West Coast. So, obviously we live in the Midwest, so it was a little tough coordinating, but we finally got everyone together and got the interview done.
Awesome. Well, then I'll say, without further ado, let's send it over to the interview with Jay and Jason.
I'd like to first of all thank Jason and Jay for agreeing to speak with us on Arvin. And before we get into Arvin and the location, I'd like both of them kind of just to introduce themselves and tell us how you got to know Arvin. So why don't we start with Jason?
All right. I'm Jason Challas, and I've known Arvin for 32 years. We originally met in college at San Jose State. We kind of become closer and closer friends after we left school and started camping pretty often together and hiking.
Okay.
Forth.
So you've known him for a long time. So
yes,
you'd consider yourself probably a really close friend of Arvin.
Really close friend. Yeah.
Okay.
We would come to Thanksgivings and dinners at our house and so forth.
Yes. Okay. And Jay, introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Jay O'Rear, and I know Arvin through Jason. I met Arvin much later in Jason and Arvin's friendship. Jason and I also have been camping and hiking together. Mm-hmm. What would you say, Jason, last 20 years or so, maybe close?
Probably, yeah.
And I'd say that I was with Jason and Arvin on camping trips, I want to say like 6 to 8 times over that period,
at least.
Yeah. Maybe upwards of 10, but it was almost always in the geography that we're going to be discussing where Arvin disappeared. But I know Arvin much less closely, but I do have that context of having hiked and camped with him with Jason.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of diving right into the hiking aspect. So as both of you mentioned, you've known Arvin for a while, hiked with him a lot. Before we get into, when he went missing, would you say that he was a pretty experienced hiker? He kind of knew his way around out on the trail?
Yes. Yeah, I'd say so. And he knew at least sort of the front side of that trail from Big Sur Station to Sykes Hot Springs quite well.
Yeah. Okay. So the location that he went missing was the Ventana Wilderness. I know in some of our previous conversations, you had mentioned some things about the area that we hadn't thought about before. Why don't you go into kind of the terrain, what the trail was like, and kind of, some of the things you guys have come across out there in your past hikes?
Do you want to speak to that, Jay?
Yeah, I can start a little bit. So the area that he went missing in it's definitely backcountry, but it's also like fairly well developed and hiked. The trails are clear, except for maybe Jason has a different opinion on this. Except for maybe like a few areas, it's not particularly difficult. It's got a lot of exposure. It's on the inland, which is to say like the eastern part of that coastline. So the coastline has Highway 1 running right alongside of it. And there's sort of the western side, which are the beaches and some, kind of more popular large parks and trails. The east side is more like quote unquote wilderness, but we're not talking like, it's not like super remote. There's you're often, on a day hike, you will pass a lot of people, especially on this leg that we're talking. He went a little further out than most people do. Like most people on a day hike or a couple days hike will stay a little more close to the town of Big Sur, and he was on a trail that went a little further into it basically ends up in Carmel Valley at a monastery. And there are people that will do that hike that are maybe a little more of a serious hiker than your average day hiker. Yeah. And I guess my only other thing before turning over to Jason is that area, that Ventana Wilderness, over the last decade or so has had multiple wildfires. Okay. So there's been like a lot of, burn down and then regrowth and then burn down again. So you get out there and, there's places that are, sort of like basically halfway regrown. And I mean, we can talk about this later, but there are some like weird spots of like really crazy overgrowth and sort of like hidden crevasses and stuff that may have played into.
Okay, so if you were to go off trail at all, there could be areas where you might not see a big drop off, or if something happened to you and you were off trail, it might be hard for people on the trail to see you potentially.
Yes, there are places where there's like, madrone or whatever, and fairly thick undergrowth despite the fires, that he could have slipped down under and not been seen by a helicopter or search and rescue.
Okay. I can't remember the specific date he was hiking when he went missing, but how is the weather usually in that area?
Pretty hot and dry. It was, I think, August 6th.
Okay.
And if on dry years, there are large swaths there between sort of Tassajara Hot Springs and China Camp, where he departed from, where you might not run into a river or a stream for quite a while. And it does, during the day, it can be, depending on the summer, it can be 100 degrees perhaps.
Okay. So you got to come in with enough water.
Yes.
Okay.
Or know that there are streams that are active, and he would have known that.
Okay. One of the other things we always try to look at in these locations is kind of wildlife. Would there have been any type of wildlife that you or Arvin or either of you would have been, worried about hiking out there? Or is it pretty, your normal kind of wildlife that you'd see, anywhere in California?
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, I'd say mostly. I think maybe the thing that just in that area in general, or that I think about when I'm out there, are snakes
Okay.
more than like big cats or.
Yeah.
I think actually, I, I don't know if you remember this, Jason, but I feel like maybe one of the times we were out there, maybe even with Arvin, there was like sign of boar, like wild boar
oh,
out there.
sure.
But people don't go out there necessarily expecting to encounter like
Yeah.
big cats. It's more like snakes
Okay.
and
Yeah.
and bad insects more
Right.
than.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like it's a pretty popular area to hike. I'm assuming the trails are pretty well maintained as well.
Yeah, I think so. Where he was, though, it's when you get east of Sykes Hot Springs, it becomes pretty remote. I think
Okay.
it's not for the faint of heart or thin-skinned hikers, but
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it
So,
is it is there. It is pretty vertical in spots too. There are areas of that trail that are pretty rocky, and sort of somewhat steep grades. There's some fairly big like cones and peaks back there.
okay. So it sounds like the first half of the hike is more, any your typical day hiker could do, but the spot that Arvin kind of pushed into was more remote and probably more for experienced hikers.
I think so. Yes.
Okay. Given all that kind of location profile, I'm sure you guys have hiked with Arvin enough to know, do you think he was, prepared to go out there the day he went missing, or would there been some reason he would have been packing light or, didn't bring water, or, something like that?
I don't think so. He was pretty well prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in general.
Okay. So I think my next question, so Jason, you're the one, you've known him for decades.
Yes.
One of the things Joe and I had a really tough time researching was kind of Arvin's past life. So, and obviously in our original episode, we had some kind of wild speculation on different theories of why he went missing.
Sure.
And, largely driven by, we didn't have a very clear grasp of, who Arvin was really as a person, kind of much before, I think we know kind of how he was like when he was, months before he went missing.
Sure.
But we don't have a picture of Arvin the person, decades before he went missing. So I don't know if you could fill the listeners in on kind of the Arvin that you knew over the decades.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly was, happy-go-lucky kind of guy, as you described, at least the past 10 years when he was in Big Sur, and ever since I've known him. I know I met him at San Jose State, where he moved from Colorado. He originally attended Colorado State, and just a funny aside, my cousin from Chicago met him on the orientation bus in 1982 at Colorado State. His friend Drew moved to San Jose to go to San Jose State, and he sort of followed, and I was friends with one of his roommates, where he was living in a large house with a lot of guys, which is how we got to know each other. While we were in college, he was a business major, and then shortly after we graduated, I was working at Adobe, where I met Jay, and Arvin was working in printing sales, and he did a little bit of banking, and then went into printing sales, and decided he didn't like the suit and wanted to go back to waiting tables, doing fine dining, and it was, nice restaurants, and eventually decided to kind of parse down a lot of his belongings. And he had spent several summers working at Big Sur, various campgrounds and restaurants, and decided he liked that lifestyle better, being closer to the woods and the water. So he moved everything down there, had several apartments, different places, either at the campgrounds where he was working, where they would have kind of an international destination. So they're like, kids would come on their gap year and work for a year there. So he would live, in the apartments at the campgrounds, or renting a cottage from someone.
Okay.
What about, Jason, what about his teaching, substitute teaching?
Oh, yes. Excuse me. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, he was also a substitute teacher. He had credential for. So some weeks he would actually commute during the winter months back to Los Gatos, where I was living, stay with me, and then do substitute teaching during the day. And he liked the little kids most of all, but and then go back to Big Sur on the weekends during the slow part of the year. But eventually he ended up transitioning all the way down there, and he was taking also classes at Monterey Peninsula College. He was interested in marine biology, and he went to a expedition up around Alaska, measuring the reduced amount of ice that is up there.
Okay. So it sounds like he's had a pretty interesting life, and it sounds like he's got a lot of different interests. And, what we were able to read about him was that he was kind of like one of those larger than life figures, kind of the life of the party.
Yes.
Everyone liked him. We didn't read anything, anybody saying a bad thing about him.
Yeah.
How was his, the couple months leading up to his disappearance? How was his mood or attitude around Big Sur? I know everyone liked him from what we read.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as I know, quite well. I mean, we spoke, I left for a trip to Europe in the period when he left for his week-long trip.
Yeah.
And we spoke just before that. And he seemed pretty normal, Arvin. I think I saw him a few months before that.
Yeah.
My wife and I took a trip down there and ran into him.
So there's nothing for you to think that he, anything was going on in his life where he would, try to go out and, lose himself. I know some of these stories of people going missing, you find out down the road that they had, some kind of hardship in their life, and they kind of go out into the wilderness to not come back. I know that sometimes happens to people, but you don't have any, reason to think that that's what happened to Arvin.
I don't. Were you going to say something, Jay?
Oh, just, and then maybe a comment on that last question. I was just going to mention that it had actually been a while since I had seen Arvin, but my girlfriend actually ran into him a few months before he was missing.
Okay.
He was he definitely was a larger than life figure down there, and he was a common visitor to a retreat center down there called Esalen. It's been there for, 50 or 60 years now. And they open up the hot springs there to the general public every night, like really late at night. It's like midnight to 1 or something is when the general public can go. And he was to be found there a lot. He hung out at Esalen, and the last time my girlfriend saw him was a few months before he went missing. And he was just there. He was hanging out in the tubs, totally convivial and friendly. And she said, like, as happy as she'd ever seen him. So that was sort of the last, I don't know, Jason, it may have been over a year that I had personally seen him, that he had passed.
But yeah, I don't have any reason to believe he would have been depressed or had anything going on. That's one thing I've thought a lot about too. And he left his wallet and all his belongings with his friend Jesse and said, if I'm not back by the 14th or I don't show up to work, call in the cavalry.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have, he wouldn't have thrown, it wouldn't have been like him to throw that kind of mask over disappearing himself.
Yeah, no, and I mean, everything that we could find on him kind of echoed what you guys both just said, that he seemed like a real happy guy. Everyone liked him. No signs of that, at least, externally. And as far as Arvin himself, from what we gather, he was a pretty big guy. He was over 6 feet tall. I mean, he's not the kind of guy that's going to get assaulted on a trail, or you go down without a fight, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Sure. He was a lover, not a fighter, for sure. But he could.
But he did have, he had kind of an imposing physical presence, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
That kind of leads me into my next question. I can't remember which one of you brought this up, but this was something Joe and I we didn't even think of at the time, but you said that in the area where Arvin went missing, there was there could have been some type of racial element to it. I don't know if either of you want to kind of expand on that.
Well, I think I probably brought that up. I mean, I think just it just one thing to just be said is like there aren't that many Black people in Big Sur, and there were like just like anecdotally, there were a lot of people that if you were to say, hey, you know Arvin, you'd be like, oh, he's the Black guy. Like it was just sort of, and they didn't. I'm not saying that they were saying that in a racial way. I'm just saying like it was very obvious. It was sort of an obvious fact.
Yeah.
And I think one of the angles, there's actually a couple of different things that I'm thinking as far as this angle goes. And one is the area that he went missing in. I mean, it's not exactly Deliverance, but it's pretty like, it's pretty wild. Like there's survivalists out there. There's like pot growers. There's actually in that valley between the Highway 1 and 101. And Jason, maybe you can help me remember this. I think like along Nacimiento Road, which connects the two highways, there's actually war games that are conducted back there. And it's a real rough and rowdy sort of backcountry.
Yeah.
And I've got a friend in LA. He was a down the street neighbor from me who lived in Monterey for almost 20 years. And when I was telling him this story, he just kind of like cocked an eyebrow, and he was just like, yeah, you know, there's just some rough people back there. And it kind of leads you to wonder, like, you know, if there could have been some racially inspired violence or whatever. But I think the other part that I think a lot about is sort of the length and depth of the investigation, which always seems sort of like weirdly short and shallow to me. I mean, there was a pretty intense sort of search and rescue effort during the first couple of weeks, but it just kind of fell out of view. And then there wasn't a lot of coverage about like a criminal investigation or, and you know, I'm not trying to like read too much into this, but it's just one of these things where you're like, oh, you know, some Black man gets lost in the forest, and it doesn't seem like there's as much attention given to it as it was, you know, like if it was like a white woman or whatever. And again, this is just me sort of speculating, but I think it's worth thinking about. And Jason, I don't know if you want to take it from there.
Sure. Were you going to say something like?
Oh no, go ahead.
I think about that as well, and there might be some cartel growers back there or something he might have stumbled upon that might have played into that also. The search and rescue effort did go on for, I think, you know, well over a month after that, but and especially on weekends, you know, as you mentioned, there were helicopters and planes, and I think at one point they had several hundred search and rescue people one weekend. They made like a big push, kind of figuring that, you know, he might have had food for a couple weeks or been able to survive, you know, just on water, you know, which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
But then I think after about a month, they sort of threw in the towel and may have moved on to other issues. But
yeah, you know, it's kind of sad. You know, we see this in case after case where there's a real hard push in the beginning, and then the case just kind of, you know, people forget about it and move on. And we did a case on a guy, Paul Miller, a Canadian guy that went missing in Joshua Tree, and his family still flies down there and hikes the trail that he went missing on, trying to find clues or something missing.
Yeah.
And even the Park Service tells us that they'll do their training sessions in areas where people have gone missing, just out of the, you know, outside chance they may find something. But
interesting.
Yeah, it's sad that, you know, these cases kind of just, you know, float off into the ether after a period of time.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting angle that we didn't look at in the original episode, of not necessarily maybe a racial element, but just it's kind of wild back there with some interesting characters.
Yeah.
And something, yeah, maybe he came across a drug deal, or somebody growing something out there, because it's really strange they didn't find anything from him.
That's one thing I was going to say, that
Yeah.
he was registered with REI. I know his friend that he left his stuff with, and the sheriff in Monterey looked up all his gear, like what color pack he had, what
Hmm.
they could find everything, not a trace. And that's the really strangest thing.
Yeah, we see this all the time. It's almost like these people just vanish off the face of the planet. It's just like they're gone. Because how can a search of hundreds of people, helicopters, canines, all these resources, and not find a shoe or a backpack or anything?
Right. Anything.
It's puzzling.
Yes.
Did either of you get contacted by any of the law enforcement that were investigating it at the time?
I did a couple times. I think at the initial,
Mm-hmm.
someone from the sheriff's office called me just because I was his emergency contact on like some of his work forms.
Okay.
Um, and just some basic questions like, do you know where he's been? Have you seen him? And kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty cut
Okay.
and dry.
So they really, at that point, probably didn't have any clue at what happened to him, or
Correct. Yeah. and still don't.
Yeah. One thing we don't know about is, at the time of his disappearance, did Arvin have any family in the United States?
Yes, his sister Zoni lives in Colorado, and I actually met her several months after his disappearance. She came out to kind of put his affairs in order and
Yeah.
take his belongings back for his nephew, her son.
Mhm.
So whom he had a good relationship with. I think he was kind of estranged from his sister, but he got along with his nephew.
Okay. Did Arvin have any partners in Big Sur at the time of his disappearance, or was he kind of living the bachelor lifestyle?
Mostly the bachelor lifestyle. I know he
Yeah.
had a couple of woman friends that he was fairly close to, but I don't think he was in a committed relationship at the time. I would have heard so, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting to kind of fill in these pieces about Arvin that we didn't know before. I guess getting into kind of what I think everyone probably struggles with is what happened to him. In our episode, we covered a lot of different theories, including exposure, animal attack, foul. One of our wild theories was foul play involving the cabin.
Yeah.
And I know you guys you mentioned to me that probably was isn't a plausible theory, but you guys know the area and knew Arvin. What do you think happened to him?
I just want to jump in with one thing, and that is,
Yeah.
And I think, even in recent conversations that Jason and I had together, I don't know that we've really ruled out the foul play idea.
Yeah.
It's because it's one of the theories that explains there being nothing to be found.
Yep.
There's also, and we can talk about this too, there's the unlikely chance that he might have crossed over to the coast side of the highway, and you could fall down a cliff and be taken out with all of your stuff, never to be for none of that to ever be found again. That feels really unlikely to me. That it's a real big detour. It's possible, but you really have to make an effort to get out to the cliffs. But I don't know. I think the last time Jason and I were talking about this, we got a little. We just ended up talking about this idea of what happened at the cabin a lot, and
Right.
and I'm a person who is very curious about how that was investigated. If the last place that he was seen was a remote cabin alone, did they bring out dogs? Did they dig stuff up? It just, I don't know. It feels like a location where you could do something to somebody and hide them in it.
I think to speak to what you and Mike and Joe discussed, that, I think it's Jack and his son taking off in the helicopter, asking him if he wanted to go with. They had sort of validation that everything was okay at that time when they took off. But
Yeah.
it is a possibility that someone came along to the cabin, because there aren't many houses out there, and perhaps was trying to break in, found a guy there that they didn't expect, and who knows what happened. I think,
Yeah, no, that was one of I think, thinking back, that was one of our theories, that maybe he was at the cabin when other people were coming out there to maybe burglarize it. Didn't they make some really expensive
Like violin bows. Yeah.
violin bows out there? Yeah. So one of the more plausible theories we had was that, Arvin was, staying there for the night or stopping there for some reason, and he just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you think evidence of that would have been found,
indeed,
if they did an investigation there, which I don't know. We tried to get the current sheriff of Monterey County to do an interview, and we were about to get him on, and he didn't.
Yeah.
But it would be really interesting to know if they had, law enforcement out there to investigate that area.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think knowing that area is, pretty wild back there, I think foul play for me now is becoming the most likely theory.
Sure. I mean, it's not impossible that he could lose his footing. Some of the locals that I talked to at his sort of memorial party that we had, said, oh yeah, he could, there's places where he could lose his footing, slide under some chaparral and not be seen. And then, as Jay mentioned, just a year or two later, there was a very devastating fire that started at Garapata and kind of wiped out a lot of the area. So if there was any evidence, it may have gone up.
That's a good point. Yeah. If anything, clothing or backpacks or shoes probably would have gone up in smoke in a forest fire.
Right. But bones, I guess not. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's one question I have for you guys that know the area. So if something would have happened to him out at the cabin, is there easy access via, like, could you get four-wheelers back there or even a truck, or is it you got to hike in and out of there or use a helicopter?
I think you got to hike in. I'm not very familiar. I read a story about Jack once that, like he would walk in when he was younger, however many miles from Big Sur. But yeah, that's, if he needed medical attention or something, that would have not been, and there's no cell phone reception back there at all.
Yeah. And especially we're talking 2006.
Right.
So, and I was just getting at the point too, if foul play would have happened, Arvin being an imposing presence, it's not going to be easy to, you'd think if someone, was trying to hide the body, that investigators would find that.
Sure.
So it's just another aspect of it that's kind of puzzling.
Yes. 2014, just to correct.
Oh, 2014. I apologize.
Yeah. No worries. Still.
So, and you guys obviously at the memorial, you were talking with a lot of the locals. What's kind of the theory around town, or do people kind of think foul play as well?
I think the two theories are either foul play, or, again, lost his footing.
Yeah.
Slipped under some chaparral, and, Jay has mentioned too, he might have taken a wrong turn. I think, as you pointed out in your prior episode, there are, a lot of, I'm sure he had maps and a compass because he was that kind of person, but he didn't have GPS, and he may have taken a wrong turn or something.
Did he have any formal kind of survival training or anything that you were aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, other than he was, an avid hiker, and he was pretty well prepared. Generally, he would always, bring food, and he'd always had plenty of extra supplies, like, this foil blankets and hand warmers, whatever. Sort of.
Yeah, I mean, he was more or less living in that backcountry most of the time anyway. Like a
Yeah.
lot of time, much of the time he was more or less living out of his van. He was a site host at a lot of the campgrounds. I mean, he was basically an outdoor guy. And I think that was the other thing I was going to mention earlier, as far as like, whether he had a disposition to sort of like disappear or whatever. Like my thought has always been like, him moving to Big Sur was that was him disappearing from.
Yeah.
That's how he was getting away from modern life. Like he did it. Like he did this. Like I think Jason and I, at some level, like admire the way that he sort of just lived this very kind of countercultural. He wasn't camping wasn't a hobby. Like that was his life. He lived outdoors, and it was really like, it was already an escape, is what I'm saying. Like, why would you escape from your escape?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. I didn't think of that initially when we were, researching Arvin, but he kind of already was kind of living that minimalist lifestyle. And now that you guys have said, kind of what we thought through the research, that there was no outward, sign that he was depressed or anything. So I think the theory that he was trying to, get lost is, not a plausible theory.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about Arvin or the disappearance, or are there any people still that of, family or friends, still kind of once a year visiting the area looking for stuff? Or
Up until this year, which it was the 5th year, some of the people that he lived with, that were part of a fraternity at San Jose State, we would meet in Carmel Valley and have a memorial hike sort of annually.
That's cool.
Yeah. This year it didn't happen. Not really looking for him, but just to share stories and speculate.
Yeah. No, that's cool. We see that with a lot of these, people like to come back, and sometimes the family will go, through the area looking for stuff, but a lot of times it's just to remember the fun times hiking. And so is there anything else about Arvin that you guys would like to tell? Any funny stories out on the trails with him, or any time that he he surprised you? Or
I just remember, for whatever reason, there was like a couple of years where didn't it seem like every time we went out, we got rained out?
Yeah.
and he definitely would not like want to leave. Like he definitely like stuck it out, but it was kind of, I don't know. He's just a very good humored person.
Yeah.
It's just I didn't spend nearly as much time as Jason did with him.
Yeah.
But I really can't think of, and not even like full on depression. I really can't even think of him being in a bad mood. I mean, he was just like a super positive, optimistic guy. He like befriended everybody. He could sit up, for hours and hours around a fire talking. He played the harmonica. He was just like, I don't know. He's just like a person you wanted to be around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there wasn't a mean bone in his body, my wife has said. I think he was, if he was ever a little sad about something, he would pick himself up and move on, in morning time, many funny stories to share. He was very good natured, well-humored guy, like just positive, super positive. And he would spend, the other thing, it was funny, he was very social, but sometimes he would go on a 10-day Vipassana retreat where you don't speak to another human for 10 days. So it's not, not unlike, I could see him being out on the trail by himself and, being happy, being alone for a little bit too. But yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think we all know people. I have a couple friends that no matter what you do to them, they always have a positive attitude.
Yeah.
So that's interesting about his nature. Guys, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about Arvin and his disappearance.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think I really like the theory you guys kind of drilled home about the foul play. I think something unfortunately happened to him, probably human related,
Yeah.
out on the trail. And I think there's probably some gaps. I wish we could have talked to the sheriff from Monterey County
Sure.
to kind of, I don't even know if they can discuss the case because I think it's still open.
Sure.
But yeah, once again, thanks for coming on, and really appreciate it.
Thanks for doing the story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. And again, thank you to Jay and Jason for taking the time out of your day to do the interview with Mike and give us some of that great feedback and inside info onto Arvin, his abilities as a hiker, and just in-depth explanation of your friendships with him. I think it was very insightful and really helped us personally. I can't speak for you, Mike, but it helped me personally really rethink about Arvin as a person. I know one of our crazier theories was that he went into Witsec and he just is skipping towns and stuff. So this really kind of obviously changed that perspective because we have more information.
Oh, absolutely. As you know from the interview, Jay and Jason really were leaning towards foul play being, the theory behind what happened to Arvin. And I think I'm really sold on that based on the fact that, the area that he went back into, hike is a pretty rowdy area of California based on, what I was told in the interview. And, there could have been some type of racial element or, he came across a crime or something strange happened up at that cabin. But I definitely think it was foul play because Arvin definitely, I can't remember if it was Jay or Jason that said, his escape was moving to Big Sur. That was kind of his, getting away from society. So they didn't think he was going to also want to, then afterwards, try to be lost out in the woods. So
sure. Yeah. It's that whole idea of who he is as a person that we just learned more information on, in addition to all the great things the community in Big Sur said about him. So I think I agree with you, and I think it solidifies the theory that we weren't pushing so hard in the initial episode. But I think, yeah, I'm with you and I'm with them. It's unfortunately probably foul play, and there just hasn't been that full closure of recovery yet.
Yeah. So, well, thank you again for everyone that tuned in. I know we've been teasing this one for a while. We are going to have a couple new episodes coming out, hopefully before the end of the year coming up. So stay tuned. And like Joe said in the beginning, if you haven't listened to the original Arvin Nelson episode, check down in the description of this interview and you'll see a link to it.
Absolutely. And as always, if you're hiking, camping, fishing, whatever, leave no trace.